Our speaker today is Beth Walls-Davis, and she will be talking about facing death with intention. Beth is a certified end-of-life doula with personal experience in midwifing people in their final moments, as well as hospice volunteering. She also serves as a life doula to several professional women and hosts vision retreats for management teams. With that, Beth, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Tristan, and thank you, Suzanne, for the invitation to be with you today. I'd like to start with some stories because I think that stories are the greatest gift that we can give to each other. And my story around this topic starts when I went back to college as an adult because I was partying too hard in the 70s to justify the student loans, so I left and went off and had adventures. And then came back and was working on a degree in psych in my 30s and did an internship at a domestic violence shelter and one in a hospice, and had the privilege of being with a lovely older woman as she left, as her niece was at her bedside begging her to stay until her mom could get there, and she didn't make it. And the challenge of being with a man who was just terrified and literally went out screaming and yelling. He was so afraid of his death. But I found that it seemed like a natural thing to die, and that I was good at bearing witness to that. And shortly after I finished my degree, my uncle came to the VA in Sioux Falls where I live, and his wife had died and his boys lived elsewhere. And my daughter and I spent a little time every day with my Uncle Gilbert. And the day that he was dying, his oldest son had made it, and Joel was beside the bed and Gilbert's laying in the bed, and they had one of these crossbars up across the bed to help him pull himself out. And Gilbert's laying there, and we think that he's taken his last breath, and all of a sudden he'd grab the bar and he'd pull himself up, and his eyes would get big, and he'd look around and he'd lay back down, and he'd get raspy, and he'd do that thing, and we'd think he was gone, and he'd grab the bar and he'd pull himself up. And this went on for quite some time. Finally I said, Uncle Gilbert, why don't you just let go? And when I get there, would you please have a bologna sandwich ready for me? And he pulled himself up, and he looked at me, and he nodded, and he laid back down, and he let go and left the planet. Bologna sandwiches were his favorite, with this spread on them that I don't know where it came from, on white Wonder Bread. We had some in his refrigerator in his room, and he had some up to the day he died. So that was the exit of my Uncle Gilbert. My dad came from a family where he had watched 4 of his brothers and his mother end up in end-stage Alzheimer's. And I asked him once what he thought about dying, and his nickname for me was Boots, and he said, I'm not scared of dying, Bootsy. It's that killing mind, because it was genetic Alzheimer's from his mother's family. And in 2000, Dad was in the second stages of Alzheimer's, where he was fading in and out, and he had congenital heart failure, and we were having to make decisions about whether to treat the heart. And we sat down, my brother and my mother and I, to have a conversation with him, and he said it was the 4th of July. It was a Sunday, or that weekend, and he said, I don't know what I do when I'm not in my right mind, but I know sometimes I'm not in my right mind. And when that happens, you just tell me about this conversation and it'll be all right. Well, he was raised by a very violent man, and he was starting to show some violent tendencies. So the grandkids were getting afraid of him, and they adored him. And my mother had some fear about being with him. And on the following Friday, I got a call saying that they had admitted him to the hospital. And I was out of town, and I came home and went to visit and sat with him. And it looked like it was going to be a long haul. We had the doctor's agreement that we were not going to treat except to keep him comfortable. So they were in Parkston, which is about 80 miles from Sioux Falls. So I came home for the weekend, and I was sitting at a concert Saturday night, and I was planning to go on Monday. I had to back up on this story. I missed an important part. It's Thursday, and my brothers and my sister and my mother and I are all together. And after a lot of conversations, my older brother finally agreed that yes, we were gonna support Dad in his exit. And so we all go out to the hospital, and my mother and sister are on one side of the bed, and I'm on the other, and my brothers are down at the foot of the bed. And I'm expecting my mother to start this conversation, right? And she's doing this across the bed. So I took my dad's hand, and his eyes are closed, and I said, "I love you, Daddy." And he opened one eye, and he said, "I love you too, Boots. What else?" I said, "Well, Daddy, if you're ready to go, we're ready to let you go." And he opened both eyes, and he said, "In other words, get the hell out of here, right?" And I said, "Oh, only if you're ready to go. Only if you're ready." And then my mom and my sister did words to him, and I did words to him. His words to me were to not screw up this relationship I was in, because I was finally with someone that he approved of, and we were planning to get married in the fall. And then the women left, and I don't know what happened with the men on that Thursday night. And then I went home. And Saturday, I'm planning to go on Monday. I turned to my husband and I said, "I think I'm going to go home tomorrow." And he said, "I think you should." So I came to Parkston, and I passed my sister on the highway, and I passed one of my brothers on the highway, and I got to Parkston, and my other brother had left. And so I went up to sit with my dad, and he's resting, and I'm doing a crossword puzzle when he opened his eyes, and he pulled a rattle, and I went, "Oh, okay, here we go." And I got on the bed, and I kneeled across his chest, and I took his head in my hands, and I told him that it was all right, and that we'd take care of Mom. And I pressed the call button, and the nurse came in and said, "How can I help?" And I said, "My dad is leaving." And the nurses were in denial. The doctor on call that weekend was in denial. Everybody was in denial. And she took his pulse and went, "Oh my God, you're right." I said, she probably said, "Gosh." And I said, "Yes, I just want you to sit and bear witness." And so she sat, and I held my dad's head in my hands as I talked him off the planet. And after he took his last breath, I crawled off the bed, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to go get my mother." She said, "Well, you can, if you want to stay with him for a while, you're welcome to do that." And I said, "Well, he's not in there." She said, "Well, if you just want to sit with him for a while, Beth, it's fine." I said, "Thank you, but I'm going to go get my mother. He's not in there." And that was my father's death. Nine years later, it's the fall of 2009, and Mom's tripping. And just about every time I call her, I ask her if she's just woken up, and she says no. And we didn't get home for Christmas because of weather, and her doctor has told her that she's having mini strokes, and as long as she continues to smoke, she's going to continue to have mini strokes. And we're frustrated, and she's doing everything the physical therapists are telling her to. My mother was the ever-ready bunny. At 76, she was playing 18 and 27 holes of golf a day. She loved life. She took care of everybody in the community. And I finally, after she tripped when she was out mowing the yard, insisted on a neurology appointment. And at that appointment, she was diagnosed with ALS and asked to make a decision about whether or not she wanted a feeding tube, because it was going to not be long that she was going to be able to continue to swallow. That was June. I went to visit her again around the 4th of July, and I called my husband and I said, "I can't come home. She cannot be here by herself." And so with the help of her girlfriends, being with her, I came home and packed, and I lived with my mom from July until October, when finally the caregivers did an intervention and said, Beth, you can't do this anymore. And Mom said she was ready to go to a facility, and she went into hospice on Halloween. And on December 1st, she blew her feeding tube, and we took her to the hospital, and they wanted to admit her, and her response was, no, Doherty. And I understood that she was saying no, Doherty. She could no longer speak, and she didn't have much strength left in her hands or her feet, but she wanted to go back to the Doherty house. So I'm like, great, let's just take a day off. So we went back to the hospice house on Sunday afternoon, and I went home when I knew she was settled. And I came in Monday morning, and I sat down at the nurse's station, and I said, let's just take the day off. Can we just, not mess around with anything? Can we just take the day off? And Deb looked at me, and she said, Beth, it's time to call your family. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Well, it was time to call my family. So everybody came. My brothers and my sisters and my nieces and my nephews, and her best friend flew in from Phoenix, where she spent the winter. Her brothers, her sister came. Everybody came. And this is Monday. And by Thursday, people are starting to peel off because, how long can you sit vigil? People's got jobs and yada, yada. And so by Friday night, everyone who lived out of town had left. And I got in the shower Saturday morning, and I was talking to her spirit, and I said, I have done everything I know how to do to care for you. What is left undone? Why are you hanging around? And then I got it. And I went in to the hospice house, and I sat down, and I took her hand, and I said, Mom, we are not going to bury you in those damn pajamas. I promise you, we are going to dress you up to the nines. Because here's what happened. She had mentioned to my sister that she wanted to be buried in these beautiful black floral pajamas that my sister had given to her. And Nina, my sister, mentioned that. And her daughter, Cassie, said, oh, yeah, she told me that too. And then her best friend said, yep, she told me she wanted to be buried in those pajamas. I'm like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Not burying you in the pajamas, Mom. And a couple of hours later, my mother passed gently into her next transition. And that was the death of my mother. There are two stories that are not personal, although they are connected to people I know, that I just want to hold up with regard to the mystery and the fragility of life. A friend of mine's neighbor, a 47-year-old father of two teenagers, went out one day to scoop snow and dropped dead in the driveway. Had a heart attack and was gone. A friend of mine's friend's daughter, an 8-year-old, died of leukemia. And 3 years later, her husband, the girl's father, took his own life. That hospice experience, had I not been a single parent concerned about taking on student loan debt, I would have pursued an MSW or a counseling degree or something that would have given me the credential to work with families and people who are dying, because I really felt called to it. And the universe gifted me these experiences of being with my uncle and my mom and my dad when they left. And I knew that when I retired, which I did in December of 2017, that I would volunteer in hospice. And June 6th of 2018, I started as a hospice volunteer. And I also did some life coaching. And that summer of 19, I had redone my website for my life coaching practice, because everybody's a life coach, to reframe it to be a life doula, because I loved the concept of the doula. Someone who isn't involved in the medical aspects of birthing, because doulas are birth doulas. That's what we know or knew at the time. But I liked also doing the life doula part. And so I decided, especially in this market, that I better get a credential. So I was interviewing people about what program, because there are a gazillion programs that certify life coaches. And I was meeting with this woman, and we'd finished the conversation, and she got up, had her coat on, and she said, "Beth, I don't know why, but I think I'm supposed to tell you that I have a friend who just got certified as an end-of-life doula." End-of-life doula. I swear to God, the heavens opened and the angels sang. Oh my gosh, here was the answer to what I had been called to. And so that was the summer of 18. In February and April of 19, I got certified as an end-of-life doula. And then in May, my husband and I went to Alaska, which was a bucket list trip for Ken. He wanted to go to Alaska, and he wanted to fly fish in Alaska with his friend Tate. And Tate and Mary came along on the trip, and we had a fabulous time. He did fall, and later we learned that he'd torn his meniscus in his knee, but he was a trooper, and we had a wonderful time, and we got back on Friday, and Monday, Kent called to make a doctor's appointment, which was very strange, because usually I was pushing him or I was calling and making the appointment. And his doctor couldn't get him in, so they referred him to a PA who said he had a virus and to go home and, it would be gone. And he was not satisfied with that. And he called his doctor again and got an appointment, and he was diagnosed with double pneumonia. Did the antibiotics, wasn't getting better, did a second round of antibiotics, wasn't getting much better. Went back in and did the second chest x-ray, and with the pneumonia cleared up, they found a tumor in the lower right lobe of his lung. And they biopsied it, and it was non-small cell carcinoma. And that thing in his knee we thought was causing discomfort in his hip, and that hip was just getting more and more uncomfortable. And the Monday that we were going for the PET scan, because you can't do MRI of the brain, you have to do a PET scan of the brain, and then, you do an MRI of the brain and you do a PET scan of the rest of the body. And we were going to do the brain MRI. He said, "I'm not going to be able to walk into that clinic. You're going to need to get a wheelchair." I'm like, "Okay." And I had crutches in the basement, so I got some crutches for him and said, "Use these and we'll get, this figured out, and then we'll work on your hip." Well, he went into the bedroom to get his shoes, and he walked out to put his shoes on, and he dropped to the ground and let out a sound I hope I never hear again. And it turned out that his femur had broken. And what we learned when they went to repair the femur is that he had cancer in his bones, in his big bones, which is not a good thing. So we got moved. They did the repair to the femur, and we got moved to a rehab center, and we were there a week. And the Monday morning that we were going to go do the MRI of his brain, he shaved for the first time in 2 weeks, and we were out walking in the hallway, and the physical therapist said, "Gosh, it looks like you're off to the races," because he was walking with such strength and determination, and I was walking behind him with the wheelchair, and I didn't hear him, but she said, "Oh, you want to sit down?" And I pushed the wheelchair up, but Ken folded over forward and made an awful sound, and I pushed the wheelchair aside, and we helped him get down and laid him down on the hallway. It's 9:30 in the morning at the rehab center, and so meals are getting passed, and there's all this chaos going on and people moving all over. And I looked at him, and put his head in my lap, and the nurse came out, and I said, "He's dying, isn't he?" And she said, "Yes." "Does he have a do not resuscitate?" Well, he didn't want to do that officially until we got the PET scan and the MRI. I said, "No, he doesn't, but don't you dare." And she said, "Okay, Beth, but I have to call the EMTs." It's like, fine, do that. And then I put his head in my lap, and I found myself saying the same words to my husband that I had said to my dad, in that it was okay to go, and I'd be fine, and I'd make sure that his children were fine. And the EMTs came and did the, "Does he have a DNR?" "No, and don't you dare." And they asked 3 times because they had to. But another nurse walked over and said, "Look at his pupils." Well, his pupils were blown. He was dead when he hit the ground. And so we got him into bed, and I called my daughter and my granddaughters, and they came. And we did an anointing and a blessing over his body, and each of us took some time with him alone. And the funeral director came, who I hadn't met, but had been highly recommended to me by a pastor friend of mine. And I was in the hall, and I said, I have a logistical question for you. And he said, "Okay." I said, "If I don't pickle and paint him, how much time have I got?" And he went, "Pickle and paint? Hadn't heard that before. But technically you've got 3 days, but I'll work with you." It's great. And my daughter finished her time with him, and we went in and we put him in the body bag and onto the gurney, and I walked him out and put him into the van, and that was my husband's death. It was also I became my first client as an end-of-life doula, because as Ken was dying, after the diagnosis, we were having conversations about what was going to happen. And I had told him that if he didn't arrange for his burial, he was going up the chimney. And so we were sitting talking about, the possibility of not getting to I'd always wanted a 30-year wedding anniversary, and he said, "We probably won't make that, but maybe we'll make 20. And I said, "So Ken, my plan is I'll take some of your ashes to the Missouri River and some of them to the Black Hills, because I know those are 2 places that you love." And he said, "Ashes? I'm no damn Viking. I'm not going to get burned up." I was like, "Okay, so fine. All right. So I'm going to have to deal with this carcass." But and then he told me that he wanted to be buried at the National Cemetery in the Black Hills, which is where he was interred. So those are just some of my death experiences. What I want to hold up is the way that language that we use says so much about our culture's perspective around death, and we are a death-phobic culture. We put our pets to sleep. Well, for God's sakes, they are not going to wake up. And we lose a parent or a child, and are we going to find them again? Well, maybe, depending on your belief. We'll find them again when we cross over those, the Rainbow Bridge or whatever. But, they're not lost, they're dead. Or after a long battle with cancer because you've lost a war, it's a medical failure. You've died. And the magical thinking that goes on around that, if we talk about it, it might happen. Our kids don't want to talk about death. I've been talking to my daughter about death before I even became a death doula. But if there's some kind of magical thinking that if we talk about it, it's going to happen. And it's really a medical failure. And so we invest thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars and physical pain in homage to the God of more time. I just get more time. Rather than focusing on the questions around what kind of time do we want to have? Because everyone, there are no exceptions. There's that saying, none of us get off this planet alive, and it's just true. We are all going to die. And people either die fast or they die slow. And if you think about that, you will find that that is true. Either people drop dead in the hall, like my husband, or are killed in accidents, or have heart attacks, or there was an obit in the paper today for a 47-year-old young man who just had a heart attack, gone. But there is no in between, and the sudden death creates shock waves for those that are left. But for those who die slow, it's a very kind of lawful transition. People's diets change. They start eating less and become less and less focused around what's going on in the physical room around them. They'll usually stop eating meat, and then they'll stop eating while the relatives, the family, the friends are going, oh, just have one bite. As if food is, we equate food with comfort, and what we fail to recognize is that the body is losing its capacity to process food. And so when people who are dying stop eating, it's their body wisdom telling them that their body no longer has the capacity to process food. And it's so hard to honor that, because we want to nourish, we want to care for in the ways that we know how. And usually that's food. So it's really hard to let go of that. And that somehow if they'll just eat, we can keep them alive. It's not happening. So I wonder, and this is a real question that I invite you into some reflection around. What if, feeling the way you feel today, you walked out of a doctor's office tomorrow and you were told that you had 3 months to live? How would you spend that time? Where would you want to go? What would you want to do? Who would you want to share that time with? What priorities would you have? We really don't know. None of us. How long we have on the planet. And so my question is, why not do those things? Why not have those adventures? Why not establish those priorities so that you're spending time with people that you want to spend time with, and you're doing the things that you want to do, and you're not doing the things you don't want to do, and you're not investing in relationships that don't nurture and feed you? The role of the doula is to help make a plan for the person who's dying, often with the feedback of, that's not even the right word, with the witnessing of the family or the folks that are going to be living into that experience. And the questions are really very basic, and ones I invite you to think about. So if you're in those last weeks, days, hours, who do you want there? Who do you not want there? Do you want music? And if so, what kind? Do you want to be read to? Do you want words? Do you want people gathered around talking about their life and having casual chat? Do you want to be touched or not? I've given many, many a foot rub, but I tell you what, if anybody had touched my father's feet, he would have levitated 3 feet up off the bed. He hated to have his feet touched. So how do you want to be touched if you want to be touched? And what do you want to have happen right after your spirit leaves? Do you want quiet? Do you want your body to be left in place for a while? Do you want the music to continue to play? So the role of the doula, or the role of the doula, and something that you can do for yourself, is to make these plans. A doula can help be a gatekeeper, so it's not a family member who's answering the door and saying, I'm sorry, my mother, father, brother, uncle only wants family present now, turning friends gently away with care. The doula can do that. The doula can be a liaison with the health professionals. I mean, she or he does not get involved in the medical aspects of care, but if the family wants more pain intervention and there's resistance from the healthcare professionals, the doula can be that advocate. And the doula can be a mediator for the family member who swoops in, after the plans have been made and everybody's in agreement. And then I'll say the oldest sister, because I am one, shows up and she's Bossy Betty and she's got a whole different idea about how this should go. Well, rather than the family having to deal with Bossy Betty, the doula can do that. And if the family can't be present for whatever reason, or there is no family, the doula can sit and be there in that final visual. And then, there are the questions of what happens to the body. What ritual or anointing or blessing does the person want or the family want? You're going to be embalmed, cremated, and now there are all kinds of opportunities around what to do with that carcass. You can be wrapped in a mushroom suit. You can be cremated. I told my daughter I wanted to be made into a diamond, and she thought that was a good idea. So I see my granddaughter someday going, and there's my grandma, and there's my mom. But now I know how much energy it takes to cremate a body, so I'm looking at other alternatives. And what kind of service do you want to have? Who officiates? Where is it? What's the music? What are the readings? What do you not want to happen at your funeral or celebration to life? And what about the stuff? God bless my mother. She had labels on the bottom of all the furniture in the house about who got it, or if we were she didn't care and to sell it. She had already written down who got which rings. I got the stemware, and so she had done all of that. And my brothers and sister and I, before she died, had made an agreement about how we were going to go through the house room by room and make decisions about who got what. It is such a gift to have those decisions made before someone is actively dying, if it's at all possible. It is an act of love. It is not kind to leave it to the people who are in shock or who are losing their center of gravity to make those decisions or guess what it is that you want. Writing it down is a great step, and telling someone or everyone where that document is, but it's an even better gift to have those conversations with the people that you love. And then what? Well, again, in this culture, somebody dies, 3 days later you have the funeral, and 3 days later you go back to work. I mean, we were lousy at communal grieving, and not so great at personal grieving either. One of the things that I gave myself permission to do after Ken died was to express my grief however and whenever and wherever it showed up. And I'll tell you that I made a lot of people really uncomfortable. I don't care. I didn't care. I know that unexpressed grief is toxic. And so I wailed in places that, people were not used to hearing people wail. The only place we really give ourselves permission to really cut loose our emotions are in sports arenas. Maybe that's why I love football so much. I'm yelling at the television screen. But we do not typically create spaces for that expression of grief, and we want other people who are grieving to not be showing it for very long. It's like, it's time for you to get over that and get on with your life. Well, says who? Says who? grief brain is a real thing. And if you haven't read Joan Didion, bless her heart, she just left, A Year of Magical Thinking. I read it as part of my doula training, and I'm so grateful because I was going through documents after Ken died, and I pulled out his passport, and I thought, well, I can't get rid of that. He might need it. It's like, oh my God, Beth, you have lost your mind. He's dead. Oh yeah, that's right. But I just put it back in the folder. And you have to create space and cut slack for people who are grieving, because they have grief brain, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Someone said to me recently that both grief and praise are grounded in gratitude, and that really rings true for me. I'd like to end with this. Give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brothers and sisters walking the streets beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give to them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved, and if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Merritt Malloy. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Beth. We really appreciate it. And we will have a little time after, if you have some time after the hour, for anybody to ask questions or continue the conversation.